The air hangs, a viscous curtain. It tastes of dust and something else. Something like wet fur and stagnant water. It clings to my skin, a humid film that prickles with a discomfort I can quite articulate. The basement. My father calls it a historical archive, but it is my sanctuary. The walls are painted a sickly rose, the kind of pastel that's supposed to be comforting, but feels like a pastel bruise. It's 1994, and the world above is a riot of flannel and angst, but down here the colors are muted, the edges blurred. Shade sits perched on the old steamer trunk, his emerald eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity in the dim light filtering through the frosted windows. He blink, he simply observes. He always observes. A low, almost subsonic thrum vibrates through the concrete floor, a feeling more than a sound. It resonates in my teeth. I clutch my notebook tighter, the paper rough against my fingertips. The sketches inside are becoming more, not better, not worse, just foit more tweet-angled lines. Impossible angles. Faces without features, they bleed onto the page, a visual echo of the swirling chaos in my head. My father is upstairs, lost in his research. As usual, he is obsessed with the house's history, the Blackwood family who built it a century ago. He thinks us uncovering secrets, piecing together a narrative. Doesn't he see the narrative unfolding within me? I try to explain, to articulate the visions, the sense of displacement, but the words catch in my throat, dissolving into the humid air. They feel false. Like a poorly translated language, the smell intensifies, the wet fur mingling with the musty odor of decaying paper. I trace the pattern of the floral wallpaper, a faded tapestry of roses and lilies. Each bloom seems to droop, to mourn. Fothe, rewatching me, a thought surfaces, unbidden and unwelcome. I shake my head, trying to dislodge it. It's just the house. It says just the shadows. A crackling sound, brittle and dry, draws my attention. My father, he's in the far corner near the old coal chute. He's been meticulously cataloging estate documents he found tucked away behind a loose panel. I can hear the rustle of aged paper, a whisper of history unfolding. He is muttering to himself, a habit he has developed over the years. I don't want to intrude. His focus is a fragile thing. He clears his throat, a sharp rasp that cuts through the oppressive stillness. Genevieve, he asks, his voice muffled by the distance. I offer a silent nod, pretending to be absorbed in my sketching. He moves closer, carrying a stack of yellow documents tied with faded ribbon. The light catches the dust motes dancing in the air, illuminating the fine lines etched around his eyes. He looks tired, older than he did yesterday. Found something interesting, he says, placing the documents on a nearby table. A hidden compartment. Seems the Blackwoods were quite secretive. He gestures towards a small, ornate wooden box, intricately carved with scenes of a pastoral landscape. It's beautiful, unsettlingly so. The wood is dark, almost black, and the carvings seem to writhe in the dim light. I feel a tremor run through me, a sudden chill despite the humidity. The air thickens, pressing against my chest. The distant, high-pitched feedback starts again, a subtle whine that vibrates in the bones of my skull. I grip the notebook, knuckles white. My father begins to read aloud from one of the documents, his voice a monotone drone. The words are archaic, filled with legal jargon and obscure references. I try to focus, but the feedback intensifies, blurring the edges of his voice. The smell of wet fur is overwhelming now, a suffocating presence. Then, a sound, a faint, discordant chime. Unlike anything I've ever heard, it echoes briefly from deeper within the basement, a crystalline note that shatters the oppressive silence. It's gone as quickly as it arrives, leaving a lingering vibration in the air. I freeze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The emerald eyes of Shade fix on a point beyond me, a darkness within the darkness. The chime, it lingered, a phantom vibration against my teeth. Shade's gaze remained fixed, unwavering beyond where I could see. My father, oblivious, continued reading. The archaic words swam before my eyes, blurring into a meaningless jumble. She wasn't forgotten. She was kept asterisk, the phrase, ripped from his lips, felt wrong, like a memory surfacing from a dream I hadn't yet dreamt, he stumbled, his hand flying to his forehead. A low groan escaped his lips, a strangled sound lost in the cavernous space. Genevieve, he mumbled, his voice distant, as if speaking through a thick pane of glass. I rushed to his side, the humid air clinging to my skin like a shroud. The smell of wet fur intensified, a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. He blinked, his eyes unfocused. "Eliza," he whispered, the name a fragile exhalation, Eliza. The name felt familiar. A flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed, pulsed behind my eyes. I'd seen it somewhere. I knew it, but the memory remained just beyond my grasp, tantalizingly out of reach. "Dad, are you all right?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He seemed to hear me. His gaze drifted towards the ornate wooden box, his fingers twitching as if yearning to touch it. The carving seemed to writhe in the dim light, the pastoral landscape twisting into something grotesque. Re-watching, the thought returned, sharper this time, laced with a prickling sense of dread. He began to speak again, his voice a disjointed stream of consciousness. "Eliza, the Blackwood estate, the music." He trailed off, shaking his head as if trying to dislodge a persistent thought. The dripping water echoed from the far corner, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to synchronize with his confusion. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop resonated in the silence, amplifying the oppressive atmosphere. I looked to Shade. His emerald eyes glowed brighter, his pupils constricted to slivers. He shifted, a subtle movement, and let out a low, guttural rumble. A warning. He didn't like this. He didn't like what was happening to my father. I knelt beside him, attempting to ground him. "Dad, focus on me. What music? What are you talking about?" He stared past me, his eyes vacant. "The melody, it soothes. It keeps them quiet." He shuddered, a visible tremor running through his frame. The pastel rose walls seemed to close in, the faded floral wallpaper pressing against me, suffocating. He reached for the stack of documents, his fingers fumbling with the faded ribbon. As he untied it, a photograph slipped out, falling face down on the concrete floor. I picked it up, my breath catching in my throat. It was a portrait, a woman, Victorian era. Her eyes were wide, filled with a haunting sadness, and her face, it was undeniably mine, or a version of mine frozen in time. The smell of wet fur became unbearable, a wave of nausea washing over me. I stumbled back, clutching my stomach. The distant feedback intensified, a high-pitched whine that resonated in my skull, threatening to shatter my sanity. Shade moved in front of me, a silent guardian, his body a solid wall against the encroaching darkness. My father's hand tightened on the documents, his knuckles white. He began to trace the Schneider family lineage, his voice a monotone drone. Johann Schneider arrived in 1888, married, children. He paused, his gaze fixed on a particular entry. Eliza Schneider disappeared, 1892. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Disappeared. Not died, disappeared. The dripping water accelerated, a frantic rhythm that mirrored the pounding of my heart. Trip, drip, drip. A metallic rasp echoed from somewhere deep within the basement, a sound like fur being dragged across concrete. He looked up, his eyes finally focusing on me. A flicker of something twin-to recognition crossed his face. Then it vanished, replaced by a blankness that chilled me to the bone. He clutched his head again, a strangled cry escaping his lips. She wasn't forgotten. She was kept. The payphone felt alien against my palm, the plastic cold and slick. "Hi, Sarah. It's me." My voice sounded distant, muffled, as if speaking underwater. I tried to convey the unsettling feeling that clung to me. The way the basement seemed to press in, the pastel rose walls now appearing sickly, almost bruised. "It's weird here. Dad's been acting strange. I don't know. It is hard to explain." The hum of the wiring in the wall intensified, a low thrum that vibrated through the receiver. Buzz, buzz. It felt like the phone itself was trying to drown out my words. Sarah's voice, bright and cheerful, drifted through the speaker. "Weird how? Like, he finally cleaned out the basement. Because honestly, Jen, you've been complaining about that for years." I felt a surge of frustration she didn't understand. None of them did. "No, not like that. It's different. He's obsessed with those documents. And the music box." I trailed off, unable to articulate the creeping dread that coiled in my stomach. The smell of wet fur, faint but persistent, wafted from the basement, a phantom scent that clung to my clothes. "You're being dramatic," Sarah said, her voice laced with amusement. "You always were, probably just stressed about finals." I slammed the receiver down, the plastic clicking sharply against the hook. The disconnect was palpable. A gulf had opened between us, widened by something I couldn't name. I turned back toward the basement stairs, the humid air a tangible weight against my skin. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting elongated, distorted shadows on the walls. Flicker, flicker, flicker. Thomas was hunched over the documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere in the house. He hadn't acknowledged my call. He hadn't even looked up. "Dad?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He continued tracing the Schneider family tree, his finger following the faded ink. "Dad, are you listening to me?" He mumbled something unintelligible, his gaze fixed on the paper. "Eliza, the collector." The words were fragmented, disjointed. The corner where shade had been circling pulsed with an unnatural darkness. He was now pressed against the wall, his emerald eyes glowing intensely, fixed on something I couldn't see. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a warning tremor that resonated deep within my bones. "Oh, Dad, this isn't funny. You're scaring me." I stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched, pulling away as if burned. "Leave me be, Genevieve. This is important." His voice was cold, distant. It wasn't my father's voice. It was something else, something hollow and unfamiliar. I tried to press him, to break through the wall of detachment that had erected around him. "What collector? What are you talking about?" He sighed, a weary exhalation that seemed to drain the life from him. They collect forgotten things, forgotten people. They preserve them." He didn't meet my eyes. He stared at the documents, lost in a labyrinth of names and dates. A fleeting movement caught my eye, flicker at the periphery of my vision. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the oppressive weight of the basement, the sickly pastel walls, the smell of wet fur. Shush, a high-pitched whine, almost imperceptible, vibrated in the air. The dripping water had stopped. The silence that followed was even more unsettling, more suffocating. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I looked back at my father, but he was oblivious, lost in his research. The electrical hum intensified, a constant, irritating drone. "Buzz. Buzz." I retreated, feeling a desperate need to escape the oppressive atmosphere. I backed up the stairs, the wood creaking under my weight. I needed air. I needed to think. I needed to get away from the basement. I needed to get away from the basement. I needed to get away from my father. Back in my room, I collapsed onto my bed, the springs groaning beneath my weight. The room felt strangely sterile, devoid of warmth. I reached for the lamp, the sudden burst of light a welcome relief. And then I saw it. A single perfectly formed black cat hair resting on my pillow. It wasn't shades. It was different, darker, almost oily. I stared at it, a wave of nausea washing over me. The hum of the wiring pulsed, a mocking echo of my rising fear for Buzz. The attic air tasted like dust and regret. Each step on the narrow staircase groaned under my weight, a chorus of complaint from the neglected timbers. Sunlight, fractured by the grimy window panes, painted the space in stripes of weak illumination. It smelled of mothballs and something else. Something damp and vaguely unpleasant, like stagnant water left to fester. The wet fur scent, a phantom I'd been chasing through the house, was stronger here, clinging to the shadows. I'd been avoiding the attic for years, a silent agreement between my father and me. Too many memories clung to these spaces, too many ghosts of a past I didn't want to confront. But the basement had become unbearable. I needed a distraction, a different kind of unsettling. The room itself was a chaotic jumble of forgotten lives. Boxes overflowed with yellowed newspapers, chipped porcelain dolls stared with vacant eyes, and moth-eaten clothing hung limply from rusted hooks. The pastel rose wallpaper, the same sickly hue as the basement, peeled in long strips, revealing layers of older patterns beneath. Scratch, scrape, fiss. The sound of my hand against the peeling paper echoed in the stillness. I started sifting through a trunk near the far wall, the wood rough against my palms. Old photographs tumbled out, their edges brittle and faded. Portraits of stern-faced men in stiff collars, women with elaborate hairstyles and mournful expressions. The usual suspects of family history. I almost dismissed them, ready to retreat back down the stairs when one caught my eye. It was a portrait of a young woman, no older than I was now. She wore a high-necked dress of dark velvet, her hair piled high in an elaborate arrangement. But it wasn't the clothing that stopped me. It was her face. It was me. The same high cheekbones, the same curve of the lips, the same unsettlingly intense eyes. A coldness bloomed in my chest, a sudden sharp intake of breath. Hiss. Foo-fun. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my lungs. A jolt, like a sudden electric shock, ran through me. Images flashed behind my eyelids. Tevni Fudrida Grand Ballroom. The scent of roses and decay. a whispered conversation in a language I didn't understand. They were fleeting, disjointed, gone as quickly as they came, leaving me disoriented and trembling. A wave of nausea rolled over me, the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. "Genevieve," my father's voice startled me. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from below. "What are you doing up here?" I clutched the photograph tighter, my fingers trembling. This woman," I stammered. "She looks just like me." He peered over my shoulder, his expression unreadable. "It is just an old photograph, sweetheart. Probably a distant relative. We all have resemblances." He dismissed it with a wave of his hand, turning to leave. "Don't spend too long up here. It is dusty." I watched him go, the coldness in my chest deepening. He didn't seem concerned, didn't seem to understand the unsettling weight of the image in my hands. The smell of wet fur intensified, localized around me, a suffocating cloud. Drip, drip. The rhythmic sound, like water falling onto stone, echoed from somewhere in the shadows. I turned back to the photograph, studying the woman's face. The light shifted, and for a fleeting moment I saw something in the darkened window behind me. A reflection. Not my own, a tall, indistinct figure dressed in a tailored suit. The face was obscured, a blur of shadow and darkness. It was gone in an instant. I blinked, and it was as if it had never been there. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen, trapped by the photograph's gaze. I stared at my reflection in the glass, and then it happened. A flicker, a distortion. The Victorian woman's face superimposed itself over my own, her eyes mirroring my fear, her expression a haunting echo of my own. The melody started subtly, a faint tinkling that I almost dismissed as the wind whistling through a crack in the window pane. Footink. Tink. It grew, a simple, looping tune played on what sounded like a music box. The notes were fragile, almost brittle, like spun glass about to shatter. A wave of disorientation washed over me, a momentary blankness where a memory should have been. What was I doing? Why was I standing here, clutching this photograph? The scent of wet fur intensified, a damp, musky odor that clung to the back of my throat. Shade, my cat, was pressed against the wall near where I'd found the photograph, his emerald eyes wide and luminous in the dim light. A low hiss escaped him, a vibration that seemed to resonate not just in the air but in my bones. He hadn't hissed like that before, not even when the thunderstorms rattled the house. This was different. This was fear. My father hadn't returned. He'd simply disappeared back upstairs, leaving me alone with the photograph and the insidious melody. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to discard it, to bury it deep within the trunk, to pretend I'd never seen it. But something held me back, a morbid curiosity, a sense of obligation to the woman staring back at me from the faded portrait. I stumbled towards a smaller wooden box tucked beneath a pile of moth-eaten shawls. It was locked. A small, tarnished key lay nestled amongst a tangle of yellowed lace. It fit. The box opened with a protesting creak inside. Nestled on a bed of faded velvet was a journal. The leather cover was worn smooth with age, the pages brittle and yellowed. The handwriting was elegant, flowing script, a stark contrast to the cramped utilitarian script of my father's handwriting. I recognized the name on the first page, Eliza Schneider. My great-great-grandmother, according to my father. But the tone was not of a woman content with her place in history. It was laced with a creeping paranoia, a growing sense of dread. Tink, tink, tink. The music box melody seemed to seep into the words, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. I read of shadows in the corners of rooms, whispers in the dead of night, a feeling of being watched. She wrote of a melody, a haunting tune that filled her head, stealing her memories, fragmenting her thoughts. "It takes pieces of me," she wrote, leaving me hollow adrift. My own memory felt thin. I couldn't recall what I'd eaten for breakfast. I struggled to remember my best friend's birthday. Small, insignificant details, yet their absence felt wrong. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My father's voice echoed from above, muffled and distant. "Thomas, are you down there?" He sounded concerned. I tried to call out to him, but the words caught in my throat. Suddenly, a sharp, visceral image flooded my mind. A swing set, bathed in the golden light of a late afternoon sun. A little boy, no older than 5, laughing as he soared through the air. A woman's voice, warm and comforting, urging him to reach for the sky. The memory was vivid, intensely emotional, yet utterly foreign. I'd never seen a swing set like that. I'd never heard that woman's voice. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic rhythm against the fragile melody of the music box. Sign tink, tink, tink. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I looked down at the journal, the words blurring before my eyes. I heard a floorboard creak above. My father was coming down. I wanted to tell him about the journal, about the memories, about the creeping sense of dread that was consuming me, but the words wouldn't come. I turned towards the basement window, intending to call out, and then I saw it. Written in condensation on the glass, a single word, stark and chilling against the murky backdrop of the overgrown garden beyond. Lost. The word lost clung to the window pane, a frosty epitaph. My breath hitched, a puff of condensation momentarily obscuring the chilling message. Tink, tink, tink. The music box melody seemed to burrow deeper, a parasitic vine twisting around my thoughts. My father's footsteps grew closer, a heavy rhythmic thud on the stairs. I needed to say something, anything, but my tongue felt thick, unresponsive. The journal lay open in my lap, Elisa Schneider's elegant script swimming before my eyes. I tried to recall the last few minutes, the sequence of events that led me to this basement, to this discovery. The swing set, the woman's voice, were they real? Fragments of a dream or something else? A tremor ran through me, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from the floorboards themselves. A wave of nausea hit me, a metallic tang rising in my throat. I stumbled back, knocking over the box of lace. The scent of wet fur intensified, a cloying sweetness that mingled with the musty odor of the basement. Shade, my cat, was a dark, agitated blur near the stairs, his emerald eyes fixed on the shadows that danced in the periphery. He snarled, a low, guttural sound, and lashed out at an empty space. Hiss, scrape, hiss, a frantic, silent warning. My father appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his face etched with concern. Genevieve, are you all right? You look pale. His voice sounded distant, muffled, as if filtered through a layer of cotton. I tried to speak, to explain about the journal, about the memories, about the feeling of being unmoored, but the words wouldn't form. They tangled in my throat, choked by the insidious melody. I found something, I managed to stammer, gesturing weakly towards the journal. Grandmother Eliza's writings. He approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the basement with a nervous intensity. Eliza, what about her? I opened the journal to the page detailing the melody, the one that stole memories. She wrote about this. This music, it takes things, pieces of you. I felt a sudden dizzying disorientation, a momentary lapse in awareness. What had I been talking about? A flicker of movement caught my eye, thicker, a fleeting glimpse of a figure standing just beyond the periphery of the light, tall, imposing, dressed in a dark, tailored suit. I blinked, and it was gone. A trick of the shadows, I told myself. Just a trick of the shadows. What's wrong, sweetheart? My father's voice was laced with worry. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my mind. Nothing, I'm just tired. I needed to research this, to understand what Eliza had been experiencing, to find a way to stop the music. I retreated to my room, the melody a persistent hum in my ears. Tink, tink, tink. I searched online, typing in keywords, music box amnesia, historical memory loss, spiritual possession. The internet offered a bewildering array of theories, ranging from scientific explanations to outlandish claims of demonic influence. I stumbled upon an article detailing ancient warding rituals, protective symbols designed to repel malevolent entities. A desperate hope flared within me. I spent hours poring over the article, sketching the symbols in my notebook. A circle enclosing a pentagram, intricate patterns of interwoven lines. As I drew, I felt a strange tingling sensation on my arm. I looked down and gasped. Faint, crimson scratches marred my skin, delicate lines that hadn't been there before. They pulsed with a faint internal light. A static hiss erupted from my radio, a jarring disruption of the otherwise silent room. Crackle, hiss, static. I frantically adjusted the dial, but the interference only intensified. A distorted voice, barely audible beneath the static, seemed to whisper a single word. Collect. Suddenly, darkness. A swirling vortex of blackness that consumed my vision. A sensation of falling, of weightlessness. Then, a soft, familiar feeling of being nestled in warm blankets. I opened my eyes. I was in my bed, the morning sun streaming through the window. A piece of antique lace lay clutched in my hand, its delicate threads cool against my skin. I couldn't remember how it got there. I couldn't remember anything about the basement. I couldn't remember Eliza Schneider. I couldn't remember the scratches. I couldn't remember anything. The sunlight felt wrong, too bright, too insistent. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache behind my eyes. The lace felt damp against my palm, clinging like a spectral hand. I couldn't place the memory of holding it, of being in bed, of anything, really. A hollowness resonated within me, a vast, echoing emptiness where recollections should have been. A tremor ran through the house, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something else. Something that vibrated not through the earth, but through the very bones of the structure. I heard a gasp from downstairs, a choked sound that sent a shiver crawling down my spine. I descended the stairs cautiously, each step a calculated risk. The air grew heavier, thicker, as I neared the basement door. Whir, click, whir. The sound of something mechanical, something hidden, seemed to emanate from behind the walls. My father was standing at the bottom of the stairs, clutching his arm. Bruises bloomed across his skin, a mottled tapestry of purple and green. Scratches, fine and crimson, laced his knuckles. What happened? I asked, my voice a shaky whisper. He looked at me, his eyes clouded with confusion and a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. I don't remember, he mumbled, his voice strained. Just a wave. A feeling of falling. He winced, flexing his injured arm. These scratches, I have no idea where they came from. The music box melody drifted up from the basement, a saccharine sweetness that felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. Tink, 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 tink. It seemed louder than before, more insistent, as if trying to burrow its way into my skull. I felt a sudden, disorienting wave of nausea. The basement stairs seemed to tilt beneath my feet. That night, the nightmare came. I wasn't myself. I was Eliza Schneider, trapped within the confines of a dimly lit room. The walls pulsed with a sickly pastel light from lavender, rose and a disturbing shade of mint green. A man in a dark suit stood before me, faceless, a void where his features should have been. He extended a hand and a music box materialized in his grasp. The melody began, a relentless, insidious spiral that tightened around my mind, stealing memories, fragmenting my identity. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. I clawed at the walls, desperate to escape, but my hands passed through them as if they were mere illusions. I awoke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. The room was bathed in the pale light of dawn. Shade was pacing restlessly at the foot of my bed, his emerald eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. He nudged my hand with his head, a silent plea. He seemed to be urging me towards the basement. The basement felt different this time, colder, more oppressive. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet fur and stagnant water, a suffocating miasma that clung to my lungs. Shade darted ahead, weaving through the shadows, his tail twitching nervously. He stopped abruptly before the far wall, emitting a low growl. I approached cautiously. The brick wall appeared solid, unremarkable. But Shade was fixated on a specific point, scratching at the mortar with his claws. Scrape, scratch, scrape. He looked back at me, his eyes gleaming with an urgent intelligence. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling for any irregularities, and then I found it 20 a slight indentation, a subtle shift in the brickwork, a hidden space. I pressed against the bricks, and with a grinding rumble, a section of the wall slid inward, revealing a small, dark chamber. The air that poured out was thick and heavy, laden with the scent of decay inside. The darkness was absolute. A low rumble, like the turning of unseen machinery, vibrated through the floor. It resonated deep within my bones, a primal tremor that stirred something ancient and unsettling within me. As I stepped across the threshold, a figure materialized within the shadows, the man in the tailored suit. He was clearer now, more defined, though still utterly devoid of features. A blank canvas where a face should have been. Shade let out a blood-curdling screech, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He collapsed at my feet, limp and lifeless. The words tumbled from his mouth, a guttural incantation I barely recognized as English. Thomas. He looked distant, his eyes fixed on some point beyond me, beyond the basement, beyond anything I could grasp. The air thickened, pressing against my skin, a palpable weight laced with the familiar cloying scent of wet fur and stagnant water. It choked me, stealing the air from my lungs. Whir, click, tink. The music box's melody swelled, a relentless tide threatening to drown out everything else. What are you doing? I managed. My voice a dry rasp, but the question felt hollow, detached as if spoken by someone else. My own reflection in the damp concrete floor seemed alien, a stranger staring back with vacant eyes. He didn't answer, his lips moving mechanically, tracing the ancient verse. The house shuddered, a deep, resonant tremor that vibrated through the floorboards, up through my legs into my very bones. It wasn't the subtle tremor from before. This was a violent, protesting groan, as if the house itself was resisting the ritual. Dust rained down from the exposed pipes overhead, a fine, gritty shower that coated my tongue. I felt a tug, a subtle but insistent pull at the edges of my mind. Fragments of memories not my own flashed before my eyes. A woman in a long, dark dress, a grand ballroom filled with swirling dancers, a chilling sense of loss. The lavender, rose, and sickly mint green of the upstairs wallpaper seemed to bleed into the basement, staining the concrete walls with their unsettling hues. "Stop it, Dad, stop it." The words felt weak, insignificant against the rising crescendo of the music box. Tink, tink, tink. Each note hammered against my skull, fracturing my thoughts, blurring the lines between reality and hallucination. I saw him then, at the periphery of my vision, a flicker of movement in the shadows. The man in the suit. He was closer now. The void where his face should have been seeming to draw me in, promising oblivion. A coldness spread through me, a creeping numbness that began in my toes and raced upwards, stealing my warmth. He was reaching for me, a silent, predatory gesture. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, a strangled gasp that was swallowed by the music. The feeling of falling, the same sensation my father described, threatened to overwhelm me. I braced myself against the wall, the rough brick scraping against my skin. "He wants me," I whispered, the words barely audible above the music. "He wants to take me." Thomas's chanting faltered, his eyes momentarily focusing on me. A flicker of recognition of fear crossed his face before it vanished, replaced by the vacant stare of someone lost in a dream. He resumed the incantation, his voice gaining strength, the ancient words resonating with an unsettling power. The air crackled with energy, a visible distortion shimmering around the faceless man. He recoiled slightly, his form momentarily unstable, as if the ritual was disrupting his connection to this reality. Hiss, whir, click. The music box's melody warped, becoming dissonant, discordant. "Reflect the darkness," Thomas roared, his voice raw with desperation. He snatched a large, ornate mirror from the wall, footing an antique piece I'd never seen before. And held it out towards the faceless man. The glass shimmered, reflecting not his image, but a swirling vortex of shadows, a glimpse into a void of unimaginable horror. The man staggered backward, a silent scream contorting his form. The music box sputtered, its melody faltering, then abruptly stopping. The house fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. But the scent of wet fur and stagnant water remained, a lingering reminder of the darkness that still lurked within these walls. The mirror trembled in my father's grip, the swirling shadows within its depths a nauseating vortex. He'd shouted something to reflect the darkness. But the words felt distant, muffled by the ringing in my ears, Eliza. The name surfaced unbidden, a fragment of a life not my own, yet somehow familiar. I saw her then, a fleeting image superimposed over my own terrified face, a young woman in a high-necked gown standing in a grand ballroom, the air thick with the scent of lilies and something else, something indefinable, like the lingering ghost of a forgotten sorrow. The faceless man recoiled, a silent, desperate flinch. For a moment, the oppressive weight on my chest lessened, the cloying smell of wet fur receding slightly. But it was a fragile reprieve. I understood with a sudden, horrifying clarity what he wanted. Not just me, but Owen, to erase their identities, their memories, their very essence, and add them to his collection. The thought sent a jolt of icy terror through me. My father stumbled, his grip on the mirror loosening. A cascade of memories not his flooded my mind. A mother's lullaby, a childhood birthday party, a stolen kiss under a summer sky, all belonging to someone else, yet felt as if they were mine. The lavender wallpaper upstairs seemed to bleed into the basement, the sickly mint green clinging to the concrete like a malignant stain. "Thomas!" I cried, reaching for him. He was swaying, his eyes glazed over, a flicker of recognition momentarily breaking through the vacant stare. He mumbled something, a jumble of syllables that coalesced into a single heartbreaking word. Genevieve. Then, with a sickening crack, the faceless man lashed out. A swift, unseen force struck my father, sending him sprawling backwards onto the damp concrete floor. The mirror clattered against the wall, the swirling shadows momentarily dissipating before reforming darker and more menacing than before. Whir, click. The music box sputtered, the melody warping into a discordant, unsettling drone. "Dad." I scrambled towards him, my knees scraping against the rough concrete. He lay motionless, his face pale and drawn, a thin trickle of blood escaping his lips. A wave of nausea washed over me, a primal instinct screaming at me to protect him. I had to connect a shade, usually a silent sentinel, hissed, a low, guttural warning. He launched himself at the faceless man, a blur of black fur and emerald eyes. but the entity seemed to shrug off the attack. A sharp, snapping sound echoed through the basement as Shade was thrown back against the wall, a visible limp in his gait. He whimpered, a pathetic, broken sound that tore at my heart. The faceless man turned his attention to me, the void where his face should have been seeming to widen, to swallow me whole. I fought against the encroaching darkness, desperately clawing for a connection, a memory, anything to anchor me to reality. Eliza, the ballroom, the lilies, the sorrow. It was all there, just beyond my grasp. Then a voice, soft and distant, whispered in my ear, a voice that felt both alien and intimately familiar. It was a memory, a feeling, a truth buried deep within my subconscious. Click, whir, tink. The distorted laughter began, a high-pitched echoing sound that seemed to vibrate within my very bones. It was a sound of triumph, of possession. A tear rolled down my cheek, tracing a path through the grime and dust. The scent of wet fur intensified, suffocating, overwhelming. The voice whispered again, closer this time, a chilling pronouncement that resonated with an ancient, terrible truth. The cost is always memory. The scent of wet fur clung to the air, thick and cloying, a physical weight pressing against my lungs. It mingled with the metallic tang of blood from my father. Slips, a nauseating cocktail that threatened to send me spiraling. Eliza's words, a whisper from the fractured fragments of memory, surfaced. Asterisk the music box. It steals. Asterisk steals what? My breath hitched. It wasn't just memories of others. It was taking for me. Thomas groaned, a low, guttural sound, and pushed himself up on his elbows. The color had drained from his face, leaving it a sickly parchment hue. He blinked, his gaze unfocused, as if struggling to navigate a landscape he no longer recognized. Genevieve, he rasped, the name a question mark hanging in the humid air. A surge of desperate hope flooded me, he remembered. For a fleeting moment, the lavender wallpaper upstairs seemed less oppressive, the sickly mint green of the basement floor less virulent. I lunged forward, grasping his hand. It felt distant, not cold, not exactly, but lacking the familiar warmth I associated with him. "Dad, it's me," I said, my voice trembling. "Genevieve." He squeezed my hand weakly, a flicker of recognition momentarily illuminating his eyes. The ritual," he mumbled, his voice slurring, "must complete it." He swayed. Then, with a sudden, almost mechanical precision, he began to chant. The words were archaic, unfamiliar, yet resonated within me, vibrating in my bones. A low hum filled the basement, growing in intensity. The music box sputtered, the discordant drones softening, the high-pitched whine receding into a gentler, almost mournful melody. It was a lullaby, sweet and sad, the kind my mother used to sing, but it wasn't T20 Herby lullaby. It was something else. Something older. The swirling shadows in the air began to coalesce, not into a vortex, but into a shimmering curtain, a veil between realities. The pastel nightmare of the basement began to fade. The vibrant lavender of the upstairs wallpaper bled into a dull gray, the mint green floor losing its sickly sheen. The colors seemed to be leaching out of the world, leaving behind a monochrome echo of what it once was. I felt a strange detachment, as if observing this transformation from behind a pane of glass. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper. He answer, his eyes fixed on the shimmering curtain. The chanting intensified, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to synchronize with my own heartbeat. And then, just as abruptly as it began, the chanting stopped. The shimmering curtain vanished. The music box's melody softened further, a gentle, almost wistful tune. Thomas slumped back against the wall, his breathing shallow and ragged. He looked at me, his eyes devoid of recognition. "Genevieve," he repeated, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "Who is Genevieve?" A wave of icy dread washed over me. He done it. He banished the entity. But at what cost? He sacrificed his memories of me. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my forehead. My own memories felt fragile, like sand slipping through my fingers. Had I always lived here? Was my father truly my father? The photograph, the one from the 1800, seemed to mock me from the dusty shelf. A new photograph lay on the floor next to Thomas. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was a portrait of him, dressed in the stiff, formal attire of the 1800s. He looked familiar, yet utterly alien. A coldness settled in my stomach. Shade lay motionless near the doorway, his emerald eyes glowing in the dim light. He didn't hiss, did growl. He simply stared at me, his gaze unwavering, a silent warning echoing in the stillness. The fade wasn't complete.